We're here with Immortal Technique. He's in the house, and he's got a new documentary coming out. We call this Rebel Headquarters, so it's actually perfectly appropriate that you'd be here.
Thank you.
The documentary is The Revolution of Immortal Technique, which makes sense. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I'm out on the West Coast visiting family. I have a lot of family out here, so it's always a pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's just do it from the top. I mean, tell me your whole story. Where were you born? Where do you live?
I was born in el Hospital Militar de Lima in South America, and at that particular time, there was a growing conflict in between Shining Path guerrillas, a Maoist section of a splinter organization of socialist rebels, and the paramilitaries and the government, which was sponsored by America and other factions looking for access to natural resources, as it always is. And my father...
No, we would never do that. Corporations from the United States looking for natural resources in Latin America, come on.
I think what was more a factor in us moving was when my father explained to me, and for people that are suffering economic downturn in America as a result of, you know, whether you want to say it was the past president's policies or just Wall Street robbing people, we had a 1,200% inflation rate a year in Peru at that particular time. You know,
well, you know, they'll turn around and they'll
worthless.
say that was your fault, that you know, you guys were irresponsible, and you know, what could we do? You know, that's right. You screwed it up, they'd say.
So, in all that poverty and all that violence going on, my father figured that it was a genius idea to uproot the family and move us to Harlem in the 1980s.
Well, it's a good thing you were escaping from poverty.
But it was very telling. I was introduced to hip hop culture immediately. It was alive, it was in the street. You could hear people on the street corner, and you could have like 8 or 9 people rapping about anything without someone calling Homeland Security or arresting them or stopping and frisking. You know, well, the good old days before there were like YouTube and cell phone cameras to catch cops from robbing drug dealers and abusing people. But I think that what was telling about it was that it gave me an environment to grow musically, and also at that particular time, hip hop was a lot more connected to culture, to saying this is knowledge of self that we need to understand, you know.
So I'm massively curious about all the details of your life. So what did your dad do in Peru?
He was teaching at a military academy.
Oh, that's
and then
interesting.
He became a professor. He didn't want to have anything to do with the military afterwards, and he became a teacher. And then my mother was a teacher.
What did he teach? Do you remember?
He taught physics.
Oh, okay.
Physics, yeah. Just introductory level. He was very calm, and he was a very, very strict man with us, you know what I mean? He was like a harsh dude, but at the same time, I must say that I'm everything that I am and everything I ever will be because somebody took the time to love me and correct my mistakes. And, you know, growing up, I was a very, like, kind of aggressive and wild kid, right? But my father had the answer for all that. Like every time we went somewhere, we went down in South America, he took me to the Amazon jungle when I was about 13, and it was like a whole nother world, you know. Where if you didn't like roaches in New York City, well then you damn sure ain't gonna like no flying roaches that are the size of a kitten going around the jungle, you know what I mean? You got to really understand what the price of life was. And I think those life lessons that he gave me, and of course, from my mother as well, helped me to have a greater understanding of things. And even though I should.
How old were you when you came to the U.S.?
Oh, I was only a few years old. You know, I was a young child, but at the same time, when I was about 7, my parents brought me back for the first time so I could understand it. And it was very impactful for me to realize, you know, hey, I'm walking around, you know, it's what they call the ghetto in Harlem. But at the same time, you know, here's another dimension of poverty. Here's something that most Americans really don't understand. Like, you see someone begging for change, and sometimes people look at them with spite. But what happens when it's a 6-year-old child begging for change? You know what I mean? Right. It's one thing to say, oh, there's a prostitute on the street. What happens when that prostitute's 10 years old? You know, it adds another dimension of the suffering for people. So I think, you know, in the documentary, we went into that. We went to lots of different places, Afghanistan, Colombia. I mean, we don't have the footage from Haiti and the extras, but we went to Peru and a series
What'd
of
you do there? Why'd you go to Afghanistan and Iraq? What's going on?
In 2008, I released a mixtape called The Third World Mixtape Album, and I used a percentage of the proceeds to get together with a human rights organization called Omade International, and we had a fundraising show. And what we did essentially was, without any other corporate sponsorship, we built an orphanage and a school in Afghanistan. And you can look them up, Omeid, OMEID.org. Very, very generous and kind, hard-working organization. And their pitch to me was very simple, you know. They just wanted to have a conversation with me about what was going on over there. And we didn't ask questions about whose kids they were, who were they orphaned by, what was the deal. It's just the fact that, you know, the Taliban began because they were orphaned by a civil war, by a conflict with Russia. All these conflicts thrown together. Some of them went to Pakistan, some of them stayed there. And at the same time, we don't want people to grow up in ignorance and hatred anymore. We want them to grow up not Americanized and Westernized. That's not the end-all be-all to all the solutions, but grow up to have an open mind. And we don't politicize children or anything like that. We just give them an opportunity that they wouldn't have if they were starving in the street somewhere.
Now, what kind of American are you trying to educate people instead of bombing them?
Right.
Okay, I mean, look at how well bombing them worked in Iraq. I don't know why you'd go away from a proven strategy.
Afghanistan is the place where empires go to die. And I think that without understanding history, and if you look at it and you say, hey, if Alexander the Great didn't have the best time here, then maybe we should rethink the strategy.
And that dude was a badass.
Right, and then the Russians, who didn't have CNN at the time to shame them into what they were doing, you know what I mean, who didn't have the world community to explore the human rights abuses going on at Bagram Air Force Base, you know, I mean, whatever existed was the Russian component at the time. If you didn't have the worldwide media there, imagine how many more human rights abuses, imagine how much more innocent loss of life, and yet now America is approaching that level where people are starting to resent their, what they call an occupation, as much as the occupation of the Russians. And that's a very sad thing. It doesn't get any political points for anybody. If anything, it's destructive to the legacy of America.
Yeah, you know, the Afghans shook Alexander off their shoulder. Great Britain, you know, one of the greatest empires ever, the Soviets, and then we think we're going to come in there and, oh, don't worry, we got this.
Right, because
we got this on lockdown.
Because we're going to give them Big Macs and Twinkies, and they're just going to forget all about.
And I wish we gave them more Big Macs and Twinkies. Honestly, most of what we gave them were drone strikes, and you know, the busting in at night. You know, to your point, in one of the provinces that we're fighting, they asked Afghans, they did a poll, which is amazing, and they said, why do you think the Americans are here? Over 90% of them had no idea what 9/11 was. They never even heard of it, okay? They had no idea why we were there. They just figured, okay, here's another country that came to occupy us, and we're not gonna let them. So this endless war and this endless fighting. So you know, obviously I totally agree with you. You know, I've been saying on the show for 10 years, you drop books on people, not bombs. And then, you know, that helps not just them, but us. I mean, look at the reason if we are exceptional at all in America in the right ways, it's because of the right things we did, building the United Nations, rebuilding our enemies, Germany and Japan, into our top allies, right? So I don't know why we didn't learn the lessons of the things that we did right.
Let me ask you something. I read about your past views and the history of what you are. I had to look you up before I got here. What was the turning point for you? Because in the very beginning, it said that you were originally for the invasion of Afghanistan. What was the turning point for you where you finally said, this is ridiculous, this doesn't even make sense anymore?
Right, so that's a great question. And I love that you're turning it around on me.
No, I'm not, I'm not trying to.
Because
I'm not trying to, it's a discussion.
No, I want you to, it's a discussion.
The dude in the back was like, yo, just talk. And I said, all right.
No. All right, so on Afghanistan specifically, look, I thought Al-Qaeda was using Afghanistan as a base, which they were, right? And I thought, look, we got hit on 9/11, and I believe in sending a message, okay? And I was afraid, honestly, that Carter didn't send a strong enough message during Iran when they took the hostages, etc. Now, I lost it when we decided to go to Iraq, because I said, what kind of message are you sending if you hit the wrong guy? If you hit the guy who didn't even attack you, you're going to create an incentive to attack you because they're going to get hit either way. You attack you, we bomb them. You don't attack us, we still bomb you, right? So that's why I hated the Iraq War for many, many different reasons. But in the beginning, to me, to go wipe out Al-Qaeda, to kill bin Laden and Zawahiri, actually makes sense. But then we stayed and we stayed and we stayed and we stayed until everybody forgot why we were there in the first place, literally. Right. You know, based on the poll that I just gave you, they don't even know why we're fighting. And the guy who really swung me around on it was one of our diplomats who resigned in protest. His name is Matthew Ho. And he came out and he said,
Shout out
Look,
to Matthew.
and he said, I was there. And he said, when you go talk to them, they say, look, if you come to my valley, I'm going to drive you out of my valley. And the reason I'm fighting you is because you're in my goddamn valley, right? And those guys aren't Al-Qaeda. Taliban's different than Al-Qaeda. Right. And then the CIA came out and said, there's no Al-Qaeda left. There's about 50 guys left in the country. There's more Al-Qaeda in Yemen, Somalia. There's more Al-Qaeda in Germany. Okay, why aren't we in the middle of Germany? So it stopped making sense to me. In the beginning, I understood why we went. But by the end, it wasn't even close to sensible.
I think my experience with a lot of the people there was simply a lot of cynicism. A lot of them saying, this is just another empire that wants to come by and take advantage of a country that they think is small and weak. And he goes, but we have a history of suffering, and we can out-suffer you because you gave up suffering a long time ago, you know? And maybe you think you're suffering in America. Maybe the people out there that are watching the show like, oh, how could you say we're not suffering? You know, I just lost you lost who? Your father, your mother? God bless you. What about someone that just lost their whole family? And what are they going to do? What do they live for now? Revenge. Revenge. Justice and revenge, and that's it. And that's turning in, that's what people are turning to.
No, I 1,000,000% agree with you, and the best example is Yemen, where we're doing the drone strikes.
Right.
And Yemen was not very anti-American to begin with. There's polling on this. There's a great Princeton professor who talks about this. He's one of the best experts in the country about it. And he said, we've turned them anti-American because what happens when somebody does a drone strike and kills your family, kills your son? What would you do if somebody killed your son?
Right.
You'd fight them for the rest of your life. So, and look, some of our drone strikes are called signature strikes as opposed to the personality strikes. Personality strikes is we know who we're executing. Signature strike is we have no effing idea who we're executing.
Yeah, we're carpet bombing.
It's basically the equivalent of carpet bombing. So now, but my question to you is, would you have not gone into Afghanistan at all?
No, I think that in the very beginning, look, if you have a state that is harboring someone who takes responsibility, even though, you know, that taking of responsibility is still debated by so many people. I mean, I think that one of the most interesting things and the saddest things about bin Laden's situation is that he was once a United States asset. That's not a conspiracy theory. I'm not making this up because I'm on a channel that has a slightly left leaning. I'm just saying it because if we don't examine those things, if we don't examine who we sponsor in terms of overthrowing a government, then at what point is there a litmus test for us to say, hey man, this is not a person that we want to be involved in. This is someone who's eventually going to turn on us. You know, I think that there was just no history, no research done about that we impetuously jumped into a situation that we didn't have an exit strategy for. There were so many things that were wrong with going. It seemed like, you know, people were just wanting to draw the sword and lead the cavalry in, and it was part of like Bush's living in a Western POV fantasy. I was very confused about who were the architects, and these geniuses still have a job coming on some television shows, that the people who decided all this, and their opinions actually considered valid. They're like, oh my God, oh, that's the dude that was completely wrong about Iraq and probably helped to cause the death of thousands of American lives, and people are just talking to him like he's a regular person. No, he's responsible for people dying. He's a fraud.
Yeah, no, again, I couldn't agree more with you. By the way, on the Western thing, Bush literally, in his side office, right off the Oval Office, used to keep Saddam Hussein's gun. Like after they took down Saddam Hussein, he's like, and he did it as if like, oh, my dad couldn't get his gun.
Right, the way Hitler Stalin made Hitler's skull into an ashtray or something. Yeah. Is that what we're doing now?
I mean, and it's so, and you talk about assets. You know, bin Laden was an asset, so was Saddam Hussein.
Right,
exactly. We sponsored Saddam Hussein to attack Iran for 8 brutal years.
Right.
I mean, and that's why Saddam was so surprised when we went after him in Kuwait. He's like, wait a minute, I thought I was on your side. And you know, is it about the oil? Is it about resources? Of course. Why do we go into Iraq? Why do we go into Libya, but we won't go into Syria? Syria doesn't have any oil. Why won't we go into North Korea? Because North Korea doesn't have any oil.
I think North Korea is different. But I think because, to me, the North Koreans were willing to do something that nobody else was. You know, and I think we sent the wrong message to people with Iraq. And I always said this. They said we have no weapons of mass destruction, right? Mm-hmm. So we say, no, you have weapons of mass destruction. And they repeat again, brother, no, I don't have any. Sorry, it's gone. And we didn't find any there. Otherwise, Dick Cheney would have been holding them over his head at a press conference. But think about it. We played the same gambit with North Korea. You have weapons of mass destruction. And what did Kim Jong-il say at the time? Yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. We got about 5 or 6 of them. Whenever you feel right, just come on down, like the price is right. That was basically his very, very aggressive attitude. He started talking about the cities they were going to bomb. You want to trade cities on the West Coast for Pyongyang? Like this fanatical, almost, I'm willing to fight you. What are you going to do? And we said, oh, nukes, we're cool. But what message does that send to people? Don't have weapons of mass destruction, but if you have them, we can't fuck with you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it basically was Kim Jong-il saying, what now, right? And what they did was they actually built those nukes during the Bush administration. While we're pretending to care about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq where they didn't have it, they built them in North Korea, and then we couldn't attack them because forget the U.S., they would destroy South Korea. They would obliterate South Korea.
Absolutely.
And so that's a mess. So let me ask you about, back to rapping and music. Do you find that rapping about politics is tougher in terms of record sales, etc., or do people like that just as much as, the sex and everything else?
Every single song isn't about like a political agenda per se. Like on the last free album I had called The Martyr, I did a song called Natural Beauty, and it was just simply about the way that magazines and media target women's insecurity. And the whole message of the song was to say, hey, listen, if you don't think you're beautiful and you don't think you're worth something, then who are you going to end up settling for in life? You know what I mean? Remember Sambo caricature characteristics. Now who's got the collagen under their lipstick, implanted Arabic hips, surgical sickness, a bipolar society that claims to be righteous, spray painting artificial melanin, trying to be like us. I mean, at some point, we have to talk about different things. You have to give music dimension. Even when I work with kids and they just want to rhyme about the streets and drug dealing and stuff, I say, listen, if you're in entertainment, just make it interesting for people. Tell me what it's like to sell drugs to a pregnant woman. Tell me what it's like to grow up in a household that you now sell the same drugs that you saw your parents grow up using. Because most people that I know that were involved in the drug game had parents that were addicted to drugs. Tell me that story. Tell me what it's like to lose a shipment and have them boys after you for them $60,000 you owe. Tell me a story that's interesting. Make the listener want to participate in some way, shape, or form, because that's the true soul of entertainment. You're making people think. You're not just providing some cookie cutter example of the way music's supposed to be, where we pretend to be a caricature of ourselves for the amusement of America. Our Black and Latino people are not one-dimensional. Middle Eastern people are not one-dimensional. Even white Anglo-Saxon American people are not one-dimensional. They have a history too. So why are we only painting us in this particular light?
Look, the 3 examples you gave, I was like, man, I kind of want to know those stories. Would you sell to a pregnant woman? And what happens if you lose the 60,000? Yeah, if they rap about that, that's fascinating.
But that's what I'm saying. I want people to explore different avenues, because if I just rhymed about running around a jungle with an AK-47 in that kind of cliche revolutionary way, then people would get tired after 1 or 2 songs. I made a song about the drug trade called Peruvian Coke, where everyone plays a different part of how drugs get to this country. The corrupt official in Latin America, some CIA agent, the drug dealer here that takes the money, the cop that gets paid overtime to steal people's drugs. And I mean, we try to make it as interesting as humanly possible.
Yeah, and that's all real. I got a friend who's doing documentary investigations on that. That's exactly how you describe it. All right, one more thing for you. Now, you talk about revolution, of course, a lot in your songs. It's in the movie, etc. How do you look? First, you got to define for us, of course, what you mean by that. But then, second of all, can we realistically get there in this country, and how would we do it?
Well, I think that before we romanticize the idea of revolution, we have to talk about the fact of what most people think about. They think of the violent overthrow of a state. And what we're talking about with revolution is first a revolution. First confronting the mythology of America. No, we didn't conquer the Native American people in glory and a series of, epic wars. No, we slowly edged them out of their land. We lied to them. We committed a genocide. And unfortunately, we've now decided to change that because it doesn't suit history. The same way Tea Partiers want to paint slave owners in in a more positive light, as if that's going to contribute to the bettering of America. That's going to improve race relations. Like, you don't improve something by lying about what the cause of the problem was. You improve something by fully accepting the criticism and differentiating it from all the things that are just thrown into the universe and saying, well, we could improve on that. Yes, it was supposed to be, God created all men equal. It was supposed to be, these truths are self-evident that, but at the same time, we abandon that in the principles of the birth of this nation. And I think that if we confront those first and we move past that, and kids say, hey, I'm sorry, Columbus was not a hero. He was a slave master and a murderer. If we say to ourselves, yes, the founding fathers were great men, but some of them owned slaves, and that was a part of the hypocrisy of America. The people that founded this country, they were Masons. That's not a conspiracy theory. Tell me, a Mason doesn't know the history of Africa and Egypt? Don't you people worship Hiram Abiff? Isn't he the great architect? At some point, you mean to tell me you really believed that black people were 3/5 of a man, or was that your justification for slavery? Because if you had just been honest, like the Caliphate and the Roman Empire, and said, no, we took you because you lost the war, that's why you're in chains. But no, it was the cowardice and the inability to just say, no, we need an excuse for this, which left the lingering legacy of racism. In other words, if we go back and we address the mythology, it helps us to open those wounds that need to be cleaned, that can still save America. And if it doesn't, then there will be no political sovereignty, because we won't have any economic sovereignty, because people won't be intelligent enough to do for themselves, because people won't be self-motivated, they won't be taking personal responsibility for what they're doing. It all starts here, and this is the last resort. I always tell kids, don't glorify this. War is not something to be glorified. It's something that destroys people. Even the winners of war come home feeling ripped apart because of what they've had to do. You can tell them that they're heroes, but some of them will always carry the pain of having to take another human being's life, because a real man doesn't take glory in that. He understands that that was a part of his duty and service, and that a soldier is only a piece of a warrior, and that a warrior is only a piece of a man. And that coming back like that, really, we should pay a lot more attention to the veterans as well. And I just want to close with saying that.
All right, Tech, thanks so much for joining us on the Young Turks, man. We appreciate it. And everybody check out The Revolution of Immortal Technique.
Peace.